Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I am delighted to be joined by Nimal Amitirigala. Now, Nimal is currently president of Grace Foods Canada, Inc., the GraceKennedy's group food subsidiary in Canada, and also a member of its board of directors. Nimal has worked within the GK group for over a decade, spending his first 5 years in business process improvement and strategic planning roles in Jamaica and the US in the Grace Foods division. He's had a wealth of experience multiculturally and is also a graduate of the GK Senior Leadership Development Program and was subsequently appointed by the group CEO to chair the inaugural GraceKennedy Group Social Media Council. He received special 95th anniversary CEO awards for Leadership International, and he's also completed the executive training at the London School of Business in 2018 on executing strategy for results. Welcome to the show, Nimal.
Thank you, Leila. I really appreciate coming on and happy to speak with you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's lovely to have you on the podcast. I feel like I've known you and your lovely wife for a very long time. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the conversation, Nimal, I wonder for our listeners who perhaps don't know you as well as I do, whether you could give us a little bit of a flavour of your personal background, your professional background, and how you came to be where you are today.
Thanks, Leila. So I have a very interesting background, and I think very fitting for a discussion around diversity and inclusion. I half Jamaican, half Sri Lankan, so from the two farthest parts of the world that you can think of. My father is Sri Lankan, hence the funny name, and my mother is Jamaican. I grew up in Jamaica and studied there. I also did some graduate studies in the university or at the University of Toronto as well, and kind of have been on this journey over the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years, kind of traveling around the world, working with GraceKennedy in large part over the last 12 years, as you mentioned. I'm doing a variety of roles for the company. Started off in kind of corporate and strategic planning and business projects, evolved into sales, then did 5 years of marketing at the global level, and then transitioning recently into this new position with GK in Canada as president of Grace Foods Canada. So been a kind of long journey. I've lived in Jamaica, I've lived in the US, I've lived in Canada for grad school, I went to the UK and lived in London for 2.5 years, and now I'm kind of full circle back after grad school back to Toronto for the last 6 months or so. So it's been a very interesting journey to this point.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for sharing. And out of pure, this is personal curiosity here, because I know that you have gone full circle. And I think it's funny how life sometimes, throws these curveballs in, and serendipity sometimes takes its course. But what's been the most interesting place that you've lived and worked in? So you've got some real mixture of rich, heritage cultures and very, very contrasting places to live and work.
Absolutely, and I would say I wouldn't pick one as a favorite. I've had really tremendous experiences in them all. I mean, my family took the decision really to move based on my wife's job at the time to London, really to get a flavor of Europe and to introduce our children to that experience and accessibility of kind of living in London and being able to really experience the culture of Europe. But the US, has tremendous opportunities as well for professionals. We lived in Florida, which is a great place to raise kids and to work professionally. The weather is great. Canada, I always call, is one of my favorite cities, Toronto. I call it a kind of, and I hope no one gets offended, but a kind of cleaner version of New York City, smaller. But, you really can do a lot of interesting things, both culturally, personally, and professionally in the city of Toronto. So I like them all. I think they all kind of give a flavor to life, or different flavors to life when you put it all together. The Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, and that's one of the big goals that I have for myself and my family.
Fantastic. And, I guess as an international citizen yourself, and I think, bringing the children up that way, what a wonderful, wonderful way to really experience all of these different kinds of cultures and to really, to a degree, kind of open your eyes to what is out there. We've lived in another country, obviously, and, I think I've told you a little bit about my personal background before. And, we were born in Hong Kong and came over to the UK, but I think, just that short stint and, in living and kind of experiencing other cultures and then coming across here to the UK, it really gives you that kind of that breadth of experience. But living in so many different countries and, far away from where you, were born, I think what a fantastic experience and fantastic experience as well for the children in addition.
And I mean, that's a goal, kind of Arlene and I, my wife, for our kids. I mean, we want them to be global citizens. My dad always spoke to me about being a citizen of the world, of really broadening your horizons. You get a really strong sense and appreciation of different cultures, and that broadens your perspective as an individual, I think. I mean, I think you can read, but there's no equivalence or no substitute for actually living and breathing the culture of another country. And also allows you to have much greater empathy, I think, for the way people live. And the way people practice their lives. And then you realize also, I think, that there's no right or wrong way. People live in different ways. They have different values. I think the more you travel and the more you live in other countries, because I think just traveling alone doesn't give you a broad enough view. But when you actually have to live in that culture for months or years at a time, you really start to understand that, that there are differences with people, but that's something that you can actually celebrate as opposed to judge.
Absolutely, because you're really getting into the finite, more granular culture on the day-to-day level as opposed to seeing it from that surface level. And I absolutely love it. And obviously, I'm so fortunate to know you and the lovely Arlene. And my goodness, you're just absolute power couple, pair of you, jet setting about different places in the world. I'm sure the children are very, very proud indeed to have such wonderful parents. But what was this? Because often, when I'm chatting to people on the podcast show, or whether it is, kind of meeting with individuals, always encourage them to live and work abroad. And, my husband says it's one of the biggest lessons of learning that he's ever had in his entire life, would always encourage it. Was it something that you had actually kind of planned out in the early days? Did you foresee yourself being in this position, or has it been something that's almost happened organically over the years, depending on how life and opportunities have arisen? Because looking from the outside in at you and Arlene and the family unit, you are this kind of dynamic power duo. It's always interesting looking at different people's units, their family units, and how they have gone about getting to where they are.
It's been very much one that has developed organically. I think in each move we made, it was a matter of the kind of circumstance at the time. I think what we have as a family done, though, is to be very open to new possibilities and to new experiences. So, my view is, and one of my philosophies are, you swing for the fences. You have a couple of chances in life, and when they come, you grab on with both hands and you really go for it. And I think as opportunities came for us to live in the US initially, and then to move to the UK for professional reasons, we seized them when they came up. And that's what we're doing now in the transition we're making to Canada. I think it's just a kind of important, almost philosophy as a family for us to just really seize opportunities when they come.
I think that is fantastic philosophy. And, it just shows as well, when I speak to you guys, always up to something new, always embarking on new adventures. And that massively resonates with me. And I'm sure it does with many of our listeners who are tuning in today. But talk to me a little, Nimal, because I know how passionate you are about diversity and inclusion and the diversity journey, and how, of course, this has been enhanced through travel, living in different parts of the world. And, also some of the work that GraceKennedy groups do, because they are very representative of not only different cultures, different people, but also the representation around those various different facets of diversity and inclusion, be it individuals from different culture, or some of the more visible diversities like, your gender equality, for example.
Right. So, I mean, I think working with a company like GraceKennedy automatically puts you into the space of diversity just because of the business we are and the kind of products that we sell. So, GraceKennedy was started in 1922 in Jamaica, and it's a company that's headquartered in Jamaica. Most of our staff is in Jamaica. We have manufacturing facilities in Jamaica, but we have evolved with the migration of Caribbean people all over the world. And we, being a very strong brand in Jamaica, the number one food brand in Jamaica, as our people really migrated to the UK, to the US, to Canada, our brand followed, and then we put up infrastructure in those countries to properly support those people. And I think being with that Caribbean culture, you're automatically faced with the issues of diversity and inclusion. You're a new food product, which is Caribbean, being introduced into various developed markets around the world. So you're introducing your product, not only you don't have to introduce it to the people who know it, but you're also introducing the product to people who are interested in trying Caribbean food. And that in and of itself kind of forces a kind of diversity and inclusion, because food is really a kind of global experience in and of itself. So working with a company like that does facilitate that. I mean, the company also has really kind of led the way, I think, very much from a Jamaican standpoint in terms of female and women leadership. And I mean, as I look across our business globally, a lot of the top tier leadership and executive are female. My own international food CEO, Andrea Coy, she's also, somebody who drives the international food business and is a kind of tremendous leader in that space. So the opportunities within the company for women, for people of color, just because of where the company originated, I think is really facilitated by that, or it's enhanced by the kind of company we are. And I think has added a lot of value in that way to my own personal experience, especially traveling outside of Jamaica.
That's really wonderful to hear. And when you explain, just reverting back on one of your earlier points, is there is such richness of diversity and culture in food and the food we eat. I know it sounds so simple, but the foods that we eat, the way that we eat, the culture that pours out of that in simplicity can be so incredibly rich. And if I may, would love to ask you a little bit about Jamaican culture. One of my very, very best friends, indeed, one of my bridesmaids actually to my wedding, her name is Selena, and she was born in St. Kitts and Nevis, and her whole family are, a lot of them, obviously a lot of them Black, real big culture in Leeds in North Yorkshire, where there is kind of a big, big Black community and Jamaican community. And I've, been over and celebrated, been lucky enough to celebrate birthdays and things like that with her. And just the culture and the vibrance of everyone sharing the food, and some of the, the dishes are just delicious. First time I've ever had curry goat, I have to say, and fish fritters. Oh my goodness. Just amazing. But it is such a different culture, isn't it? And I just, love finding out about these cultures. And, for those who perhaps haven't tried Jamaican food, or for those that haven't experienced Jamaican culture, I wonder whether you could give us a little flavor of that. Excuse the pun, because I know that we're talking about food here as well.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Jamaica, one of the things we have in Jamaica is we're little but we're talawa. And what that really means is we're a small country, but we disproportionately impact the world. When you think about Bob Marley, you think about Usain Bolt, the track and field athlete, we have really had a very strong influence on music, on food and culture globally. I think much beyond the kind of 2.8 million people approximately that we are. And, kind of growing up in that culture, I think you have a really strong sense of pride. I think that's one of the benefits, frankly, that you get growing up in a country where, in the developed world, a lot of times you're the minority. But when you grow up in the developed world and you're the majority, your whole sense of confidence, sense of self, I think can be greatly enhanced by that. In terms of food, Jamaican cuisine is a very kind of unique cuisine. We have things like ackee and saltfish, which is our national dish, which is something very kind of unique that people probably have never tried before, many people, but that's a fantastic dish. You mentioned curried goat. We have things like stewed peas, just jerk chicken, the whole jerk range of products. which are all products that GraceKennedy, the food side of GraceKennedy, really delivers to the global community. And we find such, well, just a tremendous passion around kind of just sharing that Caribbean cuisine with the world. And I think when people try it, they really are kind of broadening their horizons. It really is a cuisine in and of itself, very different from others, but pulling a lot of fusion from, the East Indies, as well as kind of African culture. So there is a kind of blend, but it really is its own kind of food. And, one of the things I've found in my travels all over the world is that there's a Jamaican restaurant everywhere. I have not yet been to a country where there's not a Jamaican restaurant. When I was a teenager traveling in Melbourne, in Australia, there was a Jamaican restaurant there. Throughout Europe, every country has one somewhere. And, I think people like it because of the fun of the culture, the color of the culture, the energy of the culture, the vibrance and the music. I think all of that really kind of embodies a very kind of exciting thing that people like to be attached to. And I always, I'm, as you can see, a very passionate Jamaican advocate. I think there are so many rich aspects to the culture that anybody who hasn't should really take a taste of.
You've just encapsulated it there perfectly. And I absolutely concur. Color, energy, vibrance, all of that is absolutely it in a nutshell. And I would completely encourage anyone who's not tried Jamaican food, or in fact actually been, across to Jamaica and, some of the islands around that. It's just absolutely just glorious. Nothing like it in the world. And I guess moving kind of onto this topic in specific about diversity and inclusion, and you mentioned there, kind of going away perhaps from the home country and into other countries, and also alluded to gently some of the fact, some of the challenging times that perhaps have been there for perhaps your people, or bringing the culture, of what you're doing into areas which are, very, very, different culturally. I wonder, how have you personally managed to kind of deal with any challenges that you have approached, and what have been perhaps some of the more challenging pieces that you've experienced moving to other countries and other cultures, where perhaps those from Jamaican communities or minorities have been far smaller than the rest of the populations, almost, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So, I think when you move into, I call them the developed markets, what you find is a lot of times people's ignorance to your background, to your culture, to what you do. I remember very early on going to grad school, and when I told some of my fellow kind of graduate students where I was from, there was this kind of almost a flippant response about Jamaica being a beach with everybody's on the beach having fun all the time. And I really had to spend time educating people to the fact that there is a kind of strong commercial center in Jamaica, that there is a decent education system there. So there are a lot of times you face these, what I'd call preconceived notions about the standard and quality of where you're from if you're not a part of the developed market. And sometimes people make the assumption, one of the things I found surprising is, people's lack of awareness that Jamaica is an English-speaking country, having been an English colony. Sometimes people will say things like, you speak very well for somebody who, it's your second language, and, you kind of have to kind of educate people to say, well, it is the first language. But I think it's really important not to, or certainly how I have operated, is to really approach those kinds of conversations with a lot of empathy, do a lot of listening, but also to be very clear about educating people when these preconceived notions are really quite different from the reality, because I think that is also part of our responsibility to educate people who are not aware about, the things that, for example, the country and culture from which you come have given to the world. Because, there's been, as I mentioned earlier, tremendous contribution that Jamaica has given to the world musically, by, through food, and also in business with a company like GraceKennedy, starting, as I mentioned, in Jamaica, headquartered in Jamaica, but very much a global company now with operations in the UK, in Canada, in the USA, even as far as in Africa, we sell products, right throughout Western Europe. So I think when people, start to get more appreciation and awareness of those things, then you start to kind of eliminate some of those preconceived notions.
Absolutely. And Nimal, I think that's fantastic advice. And as always, you approach these things with the glass half full approach, which I think is excellent. And, like you, I absolutely, I empathize with many of the questions that you have. I'm sure that you've had plenty more than myself because you've traveled and moved, abroad so many times with work. But, comments like, speaking great English, but, having maybe not been here long or battling these preconceived notions. But the advice that you give there to be empathetic, to listen and to really go through the education process, which I'm sure at times, for those who are listening in who have done this, I'm sure it can be quite draining sometimes, but I think that's, really excellent advice there. And ultimately, Jamaica and many of the other fantastic minority cultures out there have brought so much to Britain and the wider world. And actually, you look at organizations like GraceKennedy and the food that you are doing, actually, it's of massive benefit to all and being enjoyed all around the world. So I think it's a brilliant success story, really. And before we kind of wrap up for today, I'd love to go into our lightning round, Nimal. As always, I could sit here and chat to you all day, you and your lovely wife, actually. So I must make sure that I hurry you on, because I know you'll have plenty of important things to do. Before we get into the lightning round, let me just start with one other final question around diversity and inclusion, which is as simple as, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you personally?
It's very much an equality issue for me. I mean, I think really it's making sure people not only have access or be included as part of the conversation, but actually have some power to take action. Because I think sometimes, we talk about one side of the conversation, which is, people need to be included. But more than just to be included, people have to have power to make decisions. People have to have power to take actions that can enhance the ability of people to be involved in all these industries. I recently saw a talk being given about women in science and women in business and how limited that is. Certainly as a Black man, the limited number of people that you see in the kind of C-suite in general, on boards of directors, in general, is very low. And so to me, what I feel very strongly about is not just about having people having a seat at the table, because it's easy to put somebody to sit at the table, but they also have to have some power when they're seated at the table to make some difference and to be able to take action.
I couldn't agree more. It's a balance of all of these different factors. And often I when I'm speaking to people about diversity and inclusion, I say the same thing to them every time, which is there's no silver bullet for this. You must have the inclusion piece, but you also must have the diversity. And there's no point in putting that diversity in there almost as a, how do I put it now, as tokenism. Let's pop someone onto the board because they happen to be a female or Asian or Black or whatever. We must at the same time not only make them feel included and put them in an environment where they feel they can contribute their best self to the conversation, but also, as you say, give them the power, give them the actual voice to be able to do something, because there's no point them sitting there and making this a nice beauty parade, so to speak. So no, absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think representation is also so important. There's so many, and unfortunately been some terribly tragic stories that I have read of late, and that I think there is to a degree a belief that, look, the issues surrounding racism, representation, and many other facets of diversity as well, which aren't just visible, could be invisible, are still, still having, very well publicized and, kind of horrific stories and difficulties and things like that, if we do not have that representation and we are not visibly showing that there are individuals who should and deserve places in positions of power and, are able to actually fight the battle and fight the fight for people who fully understand those cultures, then really that won't go away unless we keep flying the flag and keep speaking out about it and keep having often what are tough and challenging conversations, frankly.
And I think one of the important concepts is allyship, right? I mean, as I look at what is happening in the U.S. now with, the what I consider the murder of George Floyd, what we need, certainly, when we are minorities, are people who are in the majority, whether it's white, whether it's just from an issue of economic power and independence, that they lend their voices to these causes. And I think there are so many studies. I think I've seen you speak about this quite extensively, about how much value is added when you have a diverse, either board or leadership team or just team in general, economically. So it's actually good business to be broadly inclusive. But I don't think we can be ignorant of the fact that there is an imbalance right now. There are people, that have tremendous power, and depending on how they decide to ally themselves to the causes, whether it be racism, whether it be gender equality, and all the other many very important issues of diversity and inclusion, unless they lend their voices and their wallets and their influence to the causes, then you don't really see the change happen as quickly as it happens. But I end being, and I actually posted on Facebook about this recently, being in a very optimistic place about the future, because as I look at my own children and I see the friends they have and the way they go about their life, my son is 11, my daughter is 14. They don't carry the baggage that my generation carries around things like race. They're far less, and I'm talking about both the majority and the minority not carrying the baggage. So it really gives me hope for the future, because I think there is just tremendous voices out there. Yours is one, which I think you're doing an awesome job of just really letting the conversation be told, giving people like myself a voice to be able to share with a wider community. And I think those things make me very optimistic for the future.
That's so lovely to hear, Nimal. And, again, I said it again in our earlier conversation to you and Arlene, it's always glass half full. And I think that's the beautiful thing about sharing of voices and having a chance to, have conversations like this is, you're absolutely right. Yes, there's challenges in the world, and my goodness, there is and will be, I'm sure, for the rest of our lives. But at the end of the day, there's great people out there. There's some fantastic allies, and God, met some brilliant people who are lending their voice and their power and their wallets, as you say, that to these great causes, and definitely bright futures ahead. And like I said, again before, very, very lucky children indeed to have fantastic parents like you and Arlene. But let's head into the lightning round, and Nimal, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer each of the next questions as usual. I know that you know what's coming, because I know that you listen to the podcast. So first of all, biggest question first, what is your secret to success?
I think that one for me is very easy. I swing for the fences. I think I said it earlier in the conversation, really seizing opportunities when they come and not being afraid to fail. I think there are lots of opportunities out there that people get a little scared about. I've tried to live my life by jumping in.
Great advice. And what about authentic leadership? What is that to you?
I think it's really one about listening and empathy. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. I think just the literature that she speaks about really emphasizes vulnerable leadership. And I think, to me, authenticity requires vulnerability, because when you're vulnerable, people pick up from that, and they also become vulnerable, which allows you to have tough conversations and move things forward.
Absolutely. I'm a massive fan of Brene Brown. Oh, she's just brilliant. I've got loads of her Audible books, and I often listen to them before I go to sleep. She's absolutely Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And the way she talks about shame as well is just amazing. So that word into itself is, is one that does make you feel a certain way. But the way she describes it and the way that she articulates herself, I think it's really fantastic and very authentic indeed. But anyhow, I'm breaking my own rule here of 30 seconds, so I'll shut up. Have you any heroes or sheroes or kind of books or authors, quotes, anything like that could be helpful or useful to our listeners who are tuning in?
I think I mentioned Brene Brown from before. I think anything from her. I mean, in terms of my own personal heroes, I think my mom and dad very much were those for me because, my mom, Jamaican, coming from a very poor background, had just tremendous ambition and really kind of instilled that in me. My father was a man of very high integrity, and he instilled those values in me. But at the same time, because my dad was a kind of nomad, he traveled around the world, and he kind of opened my eyes by taking me to different places. And so I think from that standpoint, my dad has really been a hero in terms of opening my eyes to the world, which I think is so important, especially in this world of diversity and inclusion.
Wonderful. And finally, I wonder if you could go back in time and speak to the young Nimal back in Jamaica. Say, what advice would you give to your younger self if you could?
I think probably I would say listen. I think certainly when I was very young, you tend to see the world through a very kind of black and white lens, and it's kind of funny. I'm no pun intended there, but really you can be very fixed in your perspective when you're younger. But you really have to listen. Listening really enhances your ability to interface with people, to get most out of relationships, to add value if you truly listen. And so I think I would say to my kind of 24-year-old self, probably, listen more, and, really try to be empathetic in how you approach your relationship.
Thank you ever so much, Nimal. It's been an absolute delight having you on the show. An absolute delight.
Pleasure, Leila, anytime, and really, really great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. By way of a very brief summary, for those that are tuning in, I think it's been an excellent podcast today with Nimal. I hope you've all been inspired and motivated. I'm absolutely sure that you have. But I think some of the key learning lessons for me are, actually really embracing other cultures and other people, whomever they may be. I love the way that Nimal described his father as this kind of traveling nomad, not being scared to dive in head first, to take every opportunity that life throws at you. I think that's one piece that everyone can benefit from. One piece of advice, I should say, seizing those opportunities. Life is a funny old thing. You never know which twists and turns it may throw at you, but actually seizing those opportunities and grasping them, as Nimal said, with both hands, I think is something which is absolutely key. But also making sure you speak out about these key issues. Obviously, we see what are terrible but also wonderful stories by the same token happening in the world, really making sure that we do give that voice to individuals around us, that we embrace those who we are working with, and also conducting yourself with very high integrity, trustworthiness, honesty, and also keeping the glass half full. I think that's one thing, Nimal, I say to you and also your wife, is you have this vibrance and positivity about you that makes people want to share and open up. And I think that's just a really fantastic traits that all of us can learn from. So thank you very much again indeed for being here today. Do send my love to the lovely family, and I we'll look forward to seeing everyone here very, very soon. Now, my name is Leila Mackenzie Dellis, and you've been listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast with you every week. You can check us out at www.dialglobal.org/podcast. If you missed anything at all, or you missed any of the quotes or some of the key pieces of learning from this podcast show, don't worry at all. All of those will be in the show notes at the end of today's show, so you can catch up with everything, and you can check out Nimal's link to his LinkedIn profile and anything you need there about Grace Kelly Foods or anything else that you missed out on from the beginning of the show. Thank you very much again, Nimal, and we'll look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.